Hey everyone, and welcome back to Key Safety Talks. Today we're diving into something that might not sound super exciting at first glance.
Yeah.
Record keeping and reporting in workplace safety.
Right.
But believe me, this goes way beyond just checking boxes for OSHA.
Yeah.
We're talking about using data as a seriously powerful tool to understand what causes those accidents and, even more important, how to prevent them.
Exactly. You see, so many people think of record keeping as this reactive thing, right?
hmm
You only do it after something bad's already happened.
Okay.
But the real magic, the really cool stuff happens when you start using that data proactively.
Proactively.
Yeah, it's like having a roadmap to a safer workplace.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, like documenting incidents for legal reasons or
No,
whatever.
not at all.
Okay.
Think of it this way. Like, imagine you're trying to solve a puzzle.
Okay.
You need all the pieces to see the full picture, right?
Well-
Well, those are your puzzle pieces. They help us identify trends, spot those recurring problems, and really understand the factors that contribute to incidents.
So we're like connected the dots and trying to prevent those future accidents.
Exactly.
Okay.
Let's say you're managing a construction site and you notice a pattern of slips, trips, and falls in a particular area.
Yeah, that's a common one.
Right. By analyzing your records, you might discover that poor lighting or uneven surfaces are contributing factors.
Oh, interesting.
So armed with that knowledge, you can then take steps to improve those conditions and prevent those future incidents.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about being proactive rather than reactive.
Exactly.
But let's be honest, the world of safety regulations can feel pretty overwhelming. Where do we even begin?
You're absolutely right. The regulatory landscape is vast, and it really depends on your industry.
Uh-huh.
But there are some fundamental principles that apply across the board.
Yeah.
For instance, understanding what constitutes a recordable incident under OSHA is crucial.
Okay.
And it's not always as straightforward as you might think.
Really, give us an example.
Okay, sure.
Like, when does a minor incident become something that needs to be formally recorded?
Okay, let's say an employee cuts their finger on a piece of machinery.
Okay, ouch.
If it just requires a simple bandage, that might be considered first aid
Okay.
and wouldn't necessarily be recordable.
Right.
But if that cut is deep enough to require stitches,
Okay.
or if it results in restricted work duty, then it crosses that threshold into a recordable incident.
Interesting. So it's not just about the initial injury itself, but also about the level of medical treatment required
Yes,
and the impact on the employee's ability to work.
exactly. And this distinction is crucial because it helps us track the severity of incidents
Okay.
and identify areas where we need to focus our safety efforts.
I can see how that would be helpful.
Hmm.
It's not just about counting incidents, it's about understanding their impact
Yes,
and using that information to make improvements.
precisely. And it's not just limited to physical injuries either.
Okay.
Work-related illnesses,
Like what is...
like carpal tunnel syndrome or hearing loss, can also be recordable if they meet certain criteria.
That makes sense. We need to consider those long-term health effects.
Yes.
Not just the immediate injuries.
Yeah.
So we're collecting all this data, but what do we actually do with it?
Right.
It can't just be about filing paperwork, right?
Absolutely not. The real power of record keeping lies in data analysis.
Okay.
We can use these records to calculate key metrics like the incident rate and the DART rate.
The what rate?
The DART rate,
Oh, yeah?
which tells us how many cases resulted in days away from work-restricted duty or job transfers.
So we're using numbers to tell a story about our safety performance.
Precisely. These metrics help us track trends over time, benchmark our performance against industry standards, and identify areas where we need to improve.
Oh.
For example, if we notice a spike in back injuries among warehouse workers,
Right.
we can investigate the root causes and implement solutions like ergonomic training or equipment modification.
I like how you're connecting those dots. From
Yes.
data points to real-world actions. It makes the whole process seem much less abstract and much more actionable.
That's what we want. We want to move beyond simply reacting to incidents and start proactively identifying and mitigating risks.
Can we talk about some real-world examples?
Sure.
I think it would help our listeners see how this all comes together in practice.
Of course. Let's take a look at some scenarios from our case studies. For instance, remember the case of Juan W., the press operator, who got his hand caught in a sheet metal scrap?
Yes, that one sounds pretty serious.
It was. His injury required medical treatment beyond first aid and kept him away from work for a few weeks.
Definitely a recordable incident.
Yes,
And a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong in an industrial setting.
exactly. And this is where those details matter. The fact that it was a sheet metal scrap, the specific machine involved, the type of injury sustained, all these pieces of information help us understand the circumstances leading up to the incident
Okay.
and potentially prevent similar occurrences in the future.
So it's like a detective's investigation.
Yep.
Piecing together the clues to understand what went wrong
Right.
and how to prevent it from happening again.
I like that analogy. Now let's contrast that with Mary J's case. She dropped a carton on her foot, injuring her toe, but was able to return to work with restricted duties.
So still a recordable incident, even though she didn't miss any full days of work.
Right, because those restricted duties indicate a level of impact that needs to be documented and tracked.
This is fascinating. I'm starting to see how even seemingly minor incidents can provide valuable data points.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to create a culture where employees feel comfortable reporting any incident, no matter how small.
That brings up an interesting point. How do we create a work environment where people feel safe speaking up and reporting those near misses without fear of repercussions?
That's where the idea of building a safety culture comes in. It's about moving beyond the blame game and creating an atmosphere of trust and open communication.
So it's about more than just rules and regulations. It's about creating a workplace where everyone feels valued and empowered to contribute to safety.
Exactly. And that's where things start to get really interesting. We'll delve deeper into building that safety culture after a quick break.
Okay, sounds good.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Key Safety Talks. Before we jumped into the break, we were in the middle of unpacking this idea of a safety culture.
Right.
I'm really curious to hear more about how companies can make this shift from simply following the rules to truly embracing safety as a core value.
Yeah, it's a journey, not a switch you can just flip, that's for sure.
Right.
One powerful way to start is by sharing the data we've been talking about with your employees.
Okay.
Make those incident rates and DART rates visible.
Okay.
Help them see the trends and understand the risks in their own work environment.
So instead of safety feeling like a top-down mandate,
Yeah,
it becomes something everyone has a stake in.
precisely. When people understand the why behind safety measures, they're more likely to buy in and actively participate. Plus, they're often the ones closest to the potential hazards, so their insights are invaluable.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like that old saying, 2 heads are better than 1.
Great.
Or in this case, maybe 100 heads are better than 1.
Right.
But how do you get people to feel comfortable speaking up? I mean, in some workplaces, there's a real fear of retribution for reporting problems.
You've hit on a crucial point. Building trust is paramount.
Okay.
That means creating clear reporting channels where employees can voice concerns without fear of being blamed or punished. It also means acknowledging and addressing those concerns promptly and transparently.
So it's not just about having a suggestion box.
No,
It's about actually listening to what people are saying and taking action.
absolutely. And it goes beyond just fixing immediate problems.
Yeah.
It's about using that feedback to improve processes, training programs, and even the design of workspaces.
Do you have any examples of companies that have done this really well, where this data-driven safety culture has led to tangible results?
Oh, absolutely. I recall one manufacturing company that was struggling with a high rate of repetitive strain injuries.
Oh.
They implemented a system where workers could anonymously report early signs of discomfort or pain. They even had ergonomic experts come in and work directly with employees to adjust workstations and tools.
So they took a proactive approach, addressing issues before they became serious injuries.
Exactly. And the results were remarkable. Their injury rates dropped significantly, and employee morale actually increased. People felt heard, valued, and empowered to contribute to their own well-being.
That's a powerful story. It shows how a shift in mindset can really make a difference. But let's get back to those case examples for a minute. I'm ready for another round of safety detective work.
All right, let's delve back into our files. Remember William O., the electrician who tragically lost his life in an electrical shock accident?
Yes, that one really shook me.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder of the importance of safety, especially when working with high-voltage equipment.
Absolutely. And in a case like this, those records become even more crucial. They allow investigators to reconstruct the incident, identify potential contributing factors, and hopefully prevent similar tragedies from happening again.
So it's not just about preventing minor injuries. It's about learning from the most serious incidents.
Yes.
And making sure those lessons aren't forgotten.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears to Sylvia P., who experienced heat exhaustion while working as a gardener. Her case highlights the importance of considering environmental factors, not just physical hazards.
Right. It's easy to focus on obvious dangers like heavy machinery or sharp objects. But we also need to think about things like extreme temperatures air quality, and even exposure to allergens.
Precisely. And Sylvia's case also underscores the importance of training employees to recognize the signs and symptoms of heat stress and to take appropriate precautions.
That's a great point. It's not just about having rules, it's about making sure people understand the risks and know how to protect themselves.
Absolutely. And her case also reminds us that even seemingly low-risk jobs can have hidden hazards.
Okay, so we've covered physical injuries and environmental factors.
Hmm.
What other types of incidents do we need to be aware of when it comes to record keeping?
Well, remember Sylvia's sister, Sally P., who had that respiratory reaction while working as a gardener?
Oh, yeah.
Her case falls into the category of work-related illnesses.
Okay.
These can be trickier to identify and track because they might not manifest immediately.
Right, it could be exposure to a certain chemical or dust over time that eventually leads to a health problem.
Exactly. And that's why meticulous record keeping is so crucial. By documenting things like the materials employees are working with, their exposure levels, and any reported symptoms, we can start to see patterns and connections that might otherwise go unnoticed.
This is starting to feel like a really complex web with all these different types of incidents and factors to consider.
It can be complex, but remember, it's all about connecting those dots and using that information to create a safer and healthier work environment.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of data analysis, building a safety culture, and considering various types of incidents. But what about the legal side of things? What are the consequences if companies don't comply with these record-keeping requirements?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, OSHA has very specific regulations in place, and they have the authority to issue citations and fines for violations. These penalties can be significant, especially for repeat offenders or for cases involving serious injuries or fatalities.
So it's not just a matter of good practice, it's a legal obligation.
Absolutely. And beyond the financial penalties, there's also the potential for reputational damage.
Mm-hmm.
Companies that are seen as neglecting safety can face negative publicity difficulty attracting and retaining employees, and even legal action from injured workers.
That makes sense. It really underscores the importance of taking safety seriously and making sure you have a robust record-keeping system in place. But where can companies go for help if they're feeling overwhelmed or unsure about how to comply with all these requirements?
There are a lot of resources available. OSHA's website is a great starting point. They have tons of information on record-keeping requirements, training materials, and even free consultations.
So there's really no excuse for not knowing the rules or having a solid plan in place.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the value of industry associations and professional organizations. They often provide guidance and support to their members on safety and compliance issues.
I like the idea of having a network of support.
Hmm.
It's not about going it alone, it's about working together to create a safer work environment for everyone. But before we get too carried away with all these positive vibes, I want to bring up a somewhat sobering topic. We've been talking about preventing incidents, but what happens when the unthinkable occurs and a major accident happens? I'm thinking about those catastrophic events we sometimes see in the news, like refinery explosions or mining disasters.
You're bringing up a crucial point, and it's one that often gets overlooked in everyday safety discussions. These large-scale industrial accidents are thankfully relatively rare, but their impact is devastating. And while our day-to-day focus might be on preventing slips and falls, the principles of record-keeping and data analysis are even more critical in these high-stakes environments.
Can you give us some examples of how those principles come into play in these catastrophic situations? I think it would be helpful for our listeners to see the connection between the everyday practices we've been talking about and these larger scale events.
Of course. One of the most well-known examples is the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. In the aftermath of that disaster, investigators spent months poring over records trying to piece together what went wrong. They looked at everything from maintenance logs and drilling reports to emails and internal communications.
So it wasn't just about the physical evidence of the site. It was about understanding the decisions and actions that led up to the event.
Exactly. And those records revealed a pattern of warning signs that were either missed or ignored. There were issues with equipment concerns raised by workers and even near-miss incidents that foreshadowed the potential for a major disaster.
It's chilling. It really underscores the importance of paying attention to those early warning signs and having a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up about potential problems.
Absolutely. Another example is the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. While the root causes of that event were complex and multifaceted, a lack of transparency and a culture of secrecy within the Soviet system certainly contributed to the scale of the disaster.
So it's not just about collecting data. It's about sharing it, analyzing it, and using it to make informed decisions.
Precisely. And these large-scale disasters serve as a stark reminder that the stakes can be incredibly high when it comes to industrial safety.
It's a sobering thought, but an important one. We can't just focus on the everyday bumps and bruises. We need to learn for the worst-case scenarios and apply those lessons to our own organizations.
Well said. And those lessons often come down to the same fundamental principles we've been talking about: meticulous record keeping, thorough data analysis, open communication, and a culture that prioritizes safety above all else.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
Yeah,
It's really made me think about safety in a whole new light, but I think we've covered a lot of ground for one episode.
I agree. We've delved deep into the intricacies of record keeping, explored the power of data analysis, and even touched on the importance of learning from catastrophic events.
Before we wrap things up, though, I want to make sure we leave our listeners with some practical takeaways.
Mhm.
What are some key steps companies can take to improve their record-keeping practices and build that strong safety culture we've been talking about?
That's a great question. And I think it's the perfect way to transition into our final segment where we'll distill all of this information into actionable advice for our listeners.
Welcome back to Key Safety Talks. As we wrap up this conversation, I'm struck by how much ground we've covered. It's easy to get bogged down in the technicalities of record keeping, but I think we've really highlighted how it all ties back to creating a safer work environment for everyone.
I completely agree. And while we've delved into some pretty complex topics, I think it's important to distill this all down to some key takeaways for our listeners. So let's brainstorm, what are those actionable steps companies can take to improve their safety practices, starting with their record-keeping systems?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is making sure everyone understands what needs to be recorded and reported.
Hmm.
We've talked about the distinction between first aid and medical treatment, but there's so many nuances to OSHA regulations. Having clear guidelines and training in place is essential.
Absolutely. And it's not just about having those guidelines, it's about making sure they're easily accessible and understandable. You don't want people digging through dense manuals or trying to decipher complex legal language. Think user-friendly checklists, flow charts, even online training modules.
That's a great point, making it easy for people to do the right thing. I also think it's crucial to emphasize the why behind record keeping. We've talked about how data can be used to identify trends and prevent future incidents, but I'm not sure everyone sees it that way. Some folks might just see it as busy work or another bureaucratic hurdle.
That's a valid point. And that's where leadership buy-in becomes so crucial. It's about setting the tone from the top down and making it clear that safety is a core value, not just an afterthought. When leaders actively participate in safety initiatives and demonstrate that they care about the well-being of their employees, it sends a powerful message.
I can see how that would make a difference. If your boss is genuinely invested in safety, you're more likely to take it seriously yourself.
Yeah.
But beyond leadership, I think it's about empowering employees at all levels to contribute to safety. You talked about creating a culture of open communication, but how do you actually make that happen?
One key is to create multiple channels for reporting concerns. Some people might feel more comfortable talking to their supervisor directly, while others might prefer a more anonymous system, like an online portal or a suggestion box. The important thing is to have options and to make sure employees feel heard and respected regardless of how they choose to report.
And it's not enough just to collect that feedback. You have to act on it.
Absolutely. That's where the data analysis comes in. You need to track those reports, look for patterns, and use that information to make meaningful changes. It could be anything from improving training programs to redesigning workstations to investing in new safety equipment. The key is to show employees that their feedback is valued and that it's actually making a difference.
I think that's a great point to emphasize, closing the loop and demonstrating that those reports are leading to tangible improvements. But let's be realistic. Implementing all of this takes time, resources, and commitment. It's not going to happen overnight.
You're absolutely right. And it's an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. It requires constant evaluation, adaptation, and a willingness to learn from both successes and failures. But I think the key is to start somewhere, to take those first steps towards building a more data-driven and proactive safety culture.
I love that perspective. It's not about achieving perfection. It's about making progress. And even small changes can have a big impact on safety. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to those catastrophic incidents we discussed earlier. Is there anything else companies can learn from those large-scale disasters?
One of the biggest lessons is the importance of systemic thinking. In many of those cases, the root cause wasn't a single error or a lone bad actor. It was a combination of factors often deeply embedded in the organization's culture, processes, and decision-making structures.
So it's not enough just to focus on individual behavior. You need to look at the bigger picture and identify those underlying vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And that can be a challenging process, requiring a willingness to ask tough questions, scrutinize long-held assumptions, and potentially make significant changes to the way things are done.
It's not easy, but it's essential.
Ah.
Those catastrophic events are stark reminders of the potential consequences when safety is compromised.
And they underscore the importance of having multiple layers of protection in place, from robust engineering controls to well-trained employees to a culture that prioritizes safety above all else.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I think we've managed to take a topic that could easily have been dry and technical and make it both engaging and thought-provoking.
I agree. And I hope our listeners have walked away with a new appreciation for the power of record keeping and data analysis in creating a safer and healthier work environment.
To everyone tuning in, thanks for joining us on Key Safety Talks. We encourage you to continue exploring this important topic and to share these insights with your colleagues and teams. Remember, safety is a shared responsibility, and we can all play a role in making our workplaces safer. Until next time, stay safe out there.